Well, for instance, I've always said the Swiss Army knife that I hid, put away in a cupboard, there's only one person that would have found it, and that was Patsy Ramsey, and they found it in the room where they found JonBenét.
Keep your baby close to you.
I was shaving, I guess, in the bathroom, and I heard Patsy scream. And she'd gone downstairs to the kitchen and found this ransom note. It was just unbelievable.
And here's the bag hanging there with this blood in it. She'd come up and squish it, you know, and what was this, you know, and where's this boy? And she'd follow it up, you know, and it's going in here.
I know who killed JonBenét Ramsey. That's what Linda Hoffman-Pugh, who cleaned, cooked, and knew every corner of the Ramsey house, has repeated for nearly 3 decades. In interviews, in lawsuits, and in a book she was never allowed to publish in full. She wasn't an ordinary witness. She was pointed at by the Ramsey family themselves as a potential suspect. She testified before a grand jury that voted to indict JonBenét's parents, an indictment that was never signed. She sued the state of Colorado for the right to say what she knew, and lost. She sued the Ramsey family itself, arguing they deliberately turned her into a scapegoat, and lost that too. Today we're going through Linda Hoffman-Pugh's story, the one housekeeper who stood at the line between witness and suspect in the JonBenét Ramsey case, based on federal court records, published rulings, and her own account. Before we start, if this channel is helping you see this case more clearly, hit like, subscribe to Tell Index, and share this with someone else following the JonBenét Ramsey case. It's what lets us keep making deeper investigative videos like this one. Before the suspicion aimed at her, let's start with who Linda Hoffman-Pugh actually was inside that house. According to case records compiled by multiple sources, Linda Hoffman-Pugh worked as the Ramseys' housekeeper for roughly 14 months before JonBenét's death. Her job wasn't just cleaning. She prepared meals, helped with the family's lavish parties, and was in the house often enough to know each family member's routines, John's schedule, Patsy's perfectionism around JonBenét's care, even the small tensions between Burke and his sister. That's exactly what made her position in the case unusual. An outsider with an insider's understanding of a genuinely complicated house layout. The kind of familiarity the outside intruder theory has always struggled to fully explain, since the crime scene suggested whoever did this knew the house unusually well. But that same familiarity, something that should have been a mark of trust, became the first reason the Ramsey family pointed suspicion in her direction. In the earliest hours of the investigation, John Ramsey told police that Linda had a key to the house and came and went freely, a detail he emphasized repeatedly. According to court records tied to the later lawsuit, Patsy Ramsey herself told Detective Linda Arndt that Hoffman-Pugh was the only one in Colorado with a key, and kept bringing up her name whenever asked who might be involved. John also described Linda to police as having exhibited very strange behavior before the murder. She'd called Patsy in tears asking to borrow money after an argument with her sister, who was also her landlord, and faced eviction over unpaid rent. That detail later appeared almost verbatim in the Ramseys' own 2000 book, The Death of Innocence, and that exact passage would later become the center of a defamation lawsuit. But the suspicion didn't stop at statements. It extended into Linda's own home and into the ransom note itself. According to case file compilations circulated among researchers of this case, police collected a number of notable items from the home of Linda and her husband, Mervyn Pugh. Nylon cord, black tape, black felt-tip pens similar to the type used to write the ransom note, and notepads, including one reportedly matching paper taken from inside the Ramsey house itself. Some sources report Linda voluntarily handed over 3 felt-tip pens and a notepad similar to the ransom note materials when police asked. Initially, according to Patsy's account to her close friend Barbara Fernie, cited in case compilations, she said the ransom note's paper looked like the kind she kept in her own kitchen, and that the handwriting reminded her of Linda's. But after being shown a full photocopy of the note, Patsy changed her account, saying the handwriting looked nothing like Linda's. If the items in Linda's house raised suspicion, what she said next, in front of a specially convened grand jury, is where her story intersects with the case's actual legal history. From 1998 until October 1999, Linda Hoffman-Pugh testified before the grand jury convened to investigate JonBenet's death. According to the federal lawsuit later filed in her name, Hoffman-Pugh versus Keenan, decided by the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in 2003. Before testifying, she was required to take an oath under Colorado law, keep her testimony secret indefinitely, unless an indictment or official report was issued. In October 1999, that grand jury actually did vote, not to charge murder directly, but to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on 2 counts of child abuse resulting in death, and a related charge tied to helping someone evade prosecution. But then, Boulder County DA Alex Hunter refused to sign the indictment, telling reporters on October 13, 1999, "I and my prosecution task force believe we do not have sufficient evidence to warrant a filing of charges against anyone who has been investigated at this time." The indictment stayed sealed for 14 years, until a judge ordered its release in 2013, following a lawsuit by journalist Charlie Brennan and the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. Contrary to what the title of this video might suggest, Linda has never said she believed Burke was the killer. According to what she's shared in interviews and in the publicly available portions of her book, Linda has remained convinced that Patsy Ramsey directly caused JonBenet's death and covered it up alone before John discovered what happened the next morning. Explaining John's role in her theory, Linda has suggested he may have helped cover things up not out of complicity from the start, but because he felt he had no other choice, particularly if Patsy could turn around and blame him if he pushed back. In her grand jury testimony, Linda reportedly described the strain in the couple's marriage in some detail, recalling that Patsy had been deeply hurt when John publicly criticized her as a poor housewife and cook. As for the ransom note, Linda has maintained she recognized Patsy's handwriting immediately, based on distinctive habits she says she saw repeatedly while working in the house. Things like how Patsy formed the letter A, a habit of adding accent marks to certain words, and a tendency to abbreviate initial letters. That belief is one Linda wanted to share with the world. Colorado law had a different opinion. After the grand jury's term ended in October 1999 without any indictment or official report being issued, Linda wanted to write a book about her experience, including her grand jury testimony. But Colorado law required every witness to keep their testimony secret indefinitely, unless an indictment or report was released. And because murder has no statute of limitations in Colorado, a new grand jury could theoretically be convened at any time. With help from attorney Darnay Hoffman, Linda sued Mary Keenan, Alex Hunter's successor as Boulder County DA, for the right to publicly discuss her testimony, citing First Amendment free speech protections. A federal district court initially sided with her, but in 2003, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals reversed that ruling, holding that the grand jury secrecy oath remained in effect as long as the investigation could theoretically continue. Losing to the state was one battle, but Linda had another legal fight ahead, this time against the very family she'd worked for over those 14 months. In 2000, John and Patsy Ramsey published The Death of Innocence, the untold story of JonBenet's murder and how its exploitation compromised the pursuit of truth. In it, they described police asking them who might have been angry or acting strangely around that time, and Patsy recalling Linda, who'd called in tears asking to borrow money after facing eviction from her rental. Linda sued the Ramseys for libel and slander in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia, arguing the passage, set inside a book that named several possible suspects for readers to consider, was deliberately written to create the false impression that she was the kidnapper, if not the killer, of JonBenet, in order to divert attention away from Patsy. In April 2002, Federal Judge Thrash dismissed the case, ruling the passage wasn't unambiguous enough, on its own, to constitute defamation. The court noted the book never named Linda as a suspect outright, and that she didn't match the killer profile the book itself described. Linda appealed. In November 2002, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, with Judge Carnes, who would later author the well-known 2003 ruling in Wolf v. Ramsey, upheld the dismissal, closing out Linda's second legal effort. While the lawsuits played out in courtrooms, a louder, messier battle was happening in the press. While the Ramsey family had the resources to hire professional PR experts, people who helped shape the story in favor of the outside intruder theory across major television programs, Linda Hoffman-Pugh, a housekeeper with no PR team of her own, faced a steady stream of tabloid coverage that frequently clipped her statements out of context for headlines. That imbalance in media firepower is one reason Linda's story, despite her being one of the few people who stood at the line between witness and suspect, testified before a grand jury, and pursued 2 separate federal lawsuits, remains far less known than the Ramsey family's own account of events. Nearly 3 decades later, the 1999 indictment sits in the case's legal history as a question mark that was never answered. A grand jury that voted to indict, but no prosecutor confident enough to take it to trial. Patsy Ramsey died in 2006, never convicted of anything. In 2008, DNA formally cleared the entire family of direct involvement. Linda Hoffman-Pugh, in the end, never abandoned her belief, but never got the legal or media platform to prove it either. She lost both lawsuits. Her book was published with 32 blank pages, and the case, to this day, remains officially unsolved. If this video helped you understand the case better, like it, subscribe to Tell Index so you don't miss the next investigation, and share it with someone who'd want to dig into this too.